Boa tarde a todos. Vou pedir que ocupem os vossos lugares. Estamos prontos para a segunda parte desta conferência da Lisbon Conference, que assinala os 2 anos de existência do canal Now. Vou pedir só às pessoas que estão ainda na sala do Coffee Break que venham para a sala da conferência. Ainda temos muitos lugares livres e a esta hora penso que conseguimos todos acomodar-nos de forma muito eficaz e com os lugares corretos, todos aqueles que queremos ocupar para começar esta conferência. Vamos então avançar para este período da tarde. Começamos com um debate sobre a inteligência artificial e as novas tecnologias. A inteligência artificial e as novas tecnologias estão a transformar profundamente a forma como vivemos, trabalhamos e comunicamos, impulsionando inovação em praticamente todos os setores. Ao mesmo tempo, levantam novos desafios éticos, sociais e económicos, exigindo uma adaptação contínua e um pensamento crítico. É sobre este assunto que vamos pensar todos em conjunto, já de seguida. Para moderar este debate, chamo Abecassis-Moedas, Pró-Reitora para a Inovação e Empreendedorismo da Universidade Católica de Lisboa, por favor. E para participar, peço que subam ao palco Brian Young, professor assistente de Filosofia da Universidade de Hong Kong, Ricardo Mendes, cofundador e CEO da Tekever, e Gyimah, ex-Ministro adjunto para o Ensino Superior do Departamento de Negócios, Energia, Estratégia Industrial e do Departamento de Educação do Reino Unido.
So good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah? Good afternoon. After this amazing lunch and amazing interview, thank you, President Barroso. I think it is time to go even deeper on the topic of AI. It has been discussed before, but we have 3 amazing experts with very different perspectives from different countries. And I want to start with my colleague Ricardo, who's from here, from Portugal. And I want to talk about the project that you're leading, Tekever, which is one of the most exciting projects in both AI and defense. And as it was mentioned at lunchtime, one of the topics for us in Europe is to be strong in defense. And often we see that defense is stronger in other countries. So tell us more about how the project started and how it has been possible to have such an important project with so much technology in a country like Portugal and in Europe in general.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure. Well, first of all, it's with a lot of work. I think that's the summary of it. Is look, Tekever didn't start as a defense company. It started as an AI company 25 years ago, before AI was sexy, you know, when everyone had Claude in their phone. I think that's actually the reason we then evolved into drones in 2008 or 9, and we started in security, not in defense. And I think that's a tremendous advantage for us. Being born to the market in security, I think created a lot of habits that are now very needed in security. Security, I think, is a market that's now in profound transformation, because of the technology that's critical in security, in defense, which is computing. Computing is absolutely critical in defense, and it unlocks AI. And I think Ukraine in the last 4 years, it's almost incredible that it's been more than 4 years. It feels like 40 sometimes, and it feels like 4 days sometimes. It showed us all, and I think it showed every country that is the reality now. It's not the future, it's now. And so I think this is a tremendous challenge, but a tremendous opportunity for us as a company, but I think for every other company, and I think for countries, because there's entropy. And for those of us that did physics, you know, change can happen when you have entropy. And basically what you have right now is a tremendous change in the market where the dominant players, that forces players that were dominant for 60, 70 years in many cases to be completely lost and trying to figure out how to reposition their companies that were optimized for a long time, many decades, to be something that is completely different to what they need to be today. And this creates an opportunity. And this is true at the company level. This is the opportunity we're trying to take, is the challenge we're trying to take in the next 3 to 5 years is how do you become a new prime in this defense age? In this defense age, which compute is one of the critical things to embrace. And how do we serve countries to do this journey? How can we work with them to do this journey? And this, I think, is a tremendous opportunity for companies. From a country point of view, I think that it's also, and you know, this morning and during lunch, I think it was an amazing interview. Congratulations on making questions that give you so much room to grow. And I think it's very clear we cannot compete on what everyone else is competing and on when things are managed, measured in hundreds of billions, like we don't have a chance. Let's not, you know, fool ourselves. We have a chance on very narrow, very specific subjects where we can be amazingly good, the best in the world. Let's focus on that and let's be the best in the world on something. This is basically what we've done. We've reduced the surface of what we do, focused on what we can be the best in the world, and trying to beat companies on that. So it's 25 years since the company was created, so it's a long time to describe, certainly on a panel. But it's about being focused, knowing exactly where we can be the best in the world, and applying every bit of energy, blood, sweat, and tears on it to make it happen.
Thank you, Ricardo. Now I want to go to ask Sam from his perspective, which is you have the privilege to have the perspective both from a policymaker, but also from an entrepreneur and an investor. And the question also was raised during lunch. How we have this whole question about regulating AI. Is it even possible? What sort of thing can we regulate? And what is your perspective on that from a large European perspective?
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me, and Jose Manuel for inviting me here. It's my first time spending time in Lisbon, although I've been to Portugal a few times before, so obrigado. And as you say, I've got the perspective of the private sector, having started my career in banking and then politics as an MP and a minister for science, technology and innovation in the UK, and now back in the private sector where we look at investing these opportunities. And we think a lot about sovereignty. We think about supporting companies where you're building strategic sovereignty at scale for European companies is what the firm I am involved with does. And we don't start from the point of regulation. We actually start from how can you have the right capabilities here in Europe. And as Ricardo says, obviously, really thinking about where companies can play and where they can win in a context where you can't deploy billions to frontier models. But that said, I also think about in a very another way to think about sovereignty before regulation, which is about the capabilities. When we think about it, we think about, if data centers can get built, if they can have the permit rights, if they can have the power they need, if you have the infrastructure available for AI, if you have the procurement underpinning that, then you have a degree of sovereignty, because companies will then want to set up in your jurisdiction and operate within your laws. So it's not just a question of where the company's founded, but I think Europe has a real opportunity when it comes to some of the infrastructure that is needed for AI, where we just don't move fast enough. If it takes you so long to get a data center up and running because power is a gating factor, then you go somewhere else. But actually, if we could use our regulations to make these things easier, then we will begin degree of sovereignty. We are beginning to see sovereignty in terms of procurement. I mean, France, for example, I think today they've kicked out Palantir from their health service, and security service. Germany are doing the same. And I think these questions are more fundamental than the regulatory question at this stage. The real risk, and I think Prime Minister Sunak said it earlier on, is that you rush to regulate something before you know what it is. And I always feel that within a European context, the need to harmonize means we get very quickly to discussions around consistency, and therefore you then trip into questions around regulation because you want to harmonize across, say, the EU, for example. And when you start doing that, you're immediately reaching for the stick rather than the carrot. And what you need, if you need, Ricardo's been going for 25 years, and sort of respect to him as an entrepreneur and building that. But you need like 100 Ricardos in order to transform European productivity in the way that Mario Draghi said, and that means more carrots rather than sticks. And by focusing on regulating AI too quickly, I think we're answering the wrong set of questions. And that's not to say questions around safety and ethics aren't important. I think they are profoundly important for a technology that's going to change very much the way we live, work, and relate to each other. But we still don't know what it is. And that is why I'm very much focused on, yes, I think sovereignty is an important question, but more importantly is really how can you have more carrots rather than sticks in the regulatory system.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Sam. So now I want to, do the connection between the topic of ethics and ask Brian, who's connecting the philosophy, the geopolitics, and the technology. How do you see this question of ethics and human agency? So we are all very worried about moral discussions, and a lot have been raised in Europe and outside. So I want to hear your perspective on how we can have an AI for good.
Well, thank you so very much for having me back. And no, you're not hallucinating. I'm once again on stage with many thanks to Jose Manuel for your magnanimity and avuncular trust. If I may just ask a question, Professor, to the audience. In the age of AI, I'm sure many of you have children. What kind of subject would you want them to pursue at university? Can you just shout the answer? Philosophy, thank you. You got my answer right away, but I thought there would be more lawyers, right? You'd want engineers, right? STEM, mathematics, yeah? Machine learning, but philosophy. That's absolutely right. And I think in order for us to understand AI properly, if I may encapsulate my predecessor's comments just then, I think Ricardo highlighted the need for audacity, and Sam, the case for sovereignty. Then for me, my ITI would be humanity. To master artificial intelligence, we have to go back to what makes us human as opposed to artificial. And that's relevant across a couple of domains. The first and foremost is employment. I get a lot of questions from my students these days asking me, when we graduate, what jobs can we do? Okay, I can't find a job. Youth unemployment in China, 18%. India, 16%. UK, US, not doing much better either. It's a troubling phenomenon. But I would say to them, what you need to do is not to look at the skills or the CV or the accolades, the titles, but ask yourself, what makes you special? And it is the fact that you're imperfect, you're flawed, you're relational, you're emotional, you're sentimental creatures, you fall in love, you fall out of love, you break up, you divorce, you make mistakes. That's what makes you special. And I think affirming that sense of human autonomy and authenticity is often overlooked because we tend to talk about, can you talk about machine learning, reinforcement learning, intricacies of alignment, the nitty-gritty and the weeds of AI and comp-sci, but what about what makes us human? That's step number one, in my honest opinion. Secondly, very quickly, on the costs of AI. There are lots of benefits of AI that we'll talk about shortly, I'm sure, but the costs of large language models would be the millions of tons, cubic tons of water that's used to cool data centers, the destruction to the environment inflicted in order for us to build data centers and harvest the rare earths required, and also other critical raw materials to sustain, of course, the entire ecosystem. This is not to say that AI is evil. I don't believe that, or the ecosystem is evil. But it is to say we have to ask, who's bearing the costs? How are the costs distributed? The fact of the matter is I was discussing with President, of the foundation just then, and we were discussing the intricacies of climate change and the AI revolution. Who's going to foot the energy and a carbon footprint of all these data centers without a corresponding upgrading of our nuclear capabilities or shift towards renewables or maybe shifting data centers to space? So we've got to think about AI not just through the lens of technology, but also distribution of costs, of burdens, and implications for labor rights, for environmental conditions, and for the world beyond, indeed, those of us sitting here in this wonderful room with all the thanks to the hospitality and kindness, of course, of President Barroso. The final observation, very quickly, is on, ultimately, the question of responsibility. AI is increasingly used in military, defense systems, security systems, national insurance, healthcare, NHS, you name it. Palantir and NHS, as Sam could attest, was quite the cause of invidious ignominy in the UK a couple of years back, right? I'm not going to comment on Palantir as a specific company, but I will just say, when AI is used, unwittingly, perhaps, inadvertently, perhaps, to cause significant harms, who's to be held responsible? Do we have a legal code for that? Do we have a regulatory framework? Can we trust and count on corporations and governments to self-regulate? I don't know. And so I'm afraid, as with all good philosophers, I don't think I'm one, as with all philosophers, I'm a mediocre philosopher. I've asked a lot of questions, but I've offered no solutions, and that's probably why I'd be a very bad politician. But on the other hand, who knows, maybe the times have changed. So I'll hand the floor back over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. You're a great philosopher, and we need questions. It's going to be so hard to get answers. I think what we need at this stage is the right questions. So now I want to go back to Sam, and it has been discussed over lunch. The question, we're talking about AI and new technologies. I don't think anyone is interested in AI and technology for the sake of it. We are trying to achieve growth. We are trying to achieve better lives for our children. So the question to you is, how can we do that? And how can we, particularly at a European level, and there has been many discussions about that, we have an issue of growth. So how can we use potentially technology to help us grow?
It's a really good question. When the UK had its AI Safety Summit, which was very well attended and very successful, I spoke to an American friend of mine asking him what he thought about it. He said, yeah, you guys can be head of safety, we want to be head of growth. And what you're speaking to was kind of the different mindset. And one of the reasons why that summit, important though it was held, was people are very terrified about this new technology and what it means for their lives. Are they all going to lose their jobs? Are their children going to get jobs? And so we sort of slipped into a mindset where, in terms of the general public, this is a really bad thing that is happening to us, right? And it can only be a terrible thing, even though they'll still use ChatGPT to order pizza or whatever they do. They still think it's a really bad thing. And we haven't got to the stage yet whereas when you go to the US, everybody is doing something with AI. I've sat on boards, in board meetings, where someone would be like, you've got to have your AI strategy, and even if you can't deliver it today, you figure it out over 2 years, but I only want you to come to this board meeting with an AI strategy. It's a completely different mindset. And I think, so the first thing is we kind of need a mindset shift, as in, the genie's out of the bottle. We're not going to go back to a world, the status quo ante, where AI doesn't really exist. But the genie's out of the bottle doesn't mean that the race is over. When I talk to my American friends, they also talk as though the race is over. It's like, Europe is backward, you guys missed the boat. But I think Europe has got tremendous opportunities, and there is a great reason for European technology superabundance, not just judging by Europe's history with these technologies, but I sat on the board of Oxford University Innovation for 5 years, and great technologies being licensed out of the spin-outs here. Sure, you see the same here in Portugal, all across Europe. And these technologies are subsidized by European taxpayers, right? Because the research is done at our universities, the academics discover whatever the product is, they turn them into ventures. And then what happens is when they have to scale, we don't have readily available risk capital for them to scale. And so you then think, well, you might as well accept money from the US venture capital firm, and I have no problem with that. I'm a free marketeer. But what happens is once you get that capital, down the line, the governance changes. And when the governance changes, you then have to move to the US because it's a bigger market, you can scale more quickly there. And so you have great technologies were discovered in Europe, brains in Europe, and then they move, right? Demis Hassabis, absolutely terrific, founder of DeepMind. So DeepMind at the time, an AI company for 600 million. And he's got a new one, so I'm sure he's going to do well for himself. But then went to Google, and there are countless stories of Geoffrey Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize for AI, a Brit. You know, I'm talking about the Brits because that's a country I know, and this is a feature across all of Europe. So time and again, it's not that we don't have the intellectual capital. It's not that the intellectual capital is not productive, but when it comes to really scaling from ventures into companies that are really globally competitive, we have a problem. And that gap in terms of pools of capital, which Mario Draghi talks about in his competitiveness report, is a real issue. And I began to think about some of these things actually pre the Ukraine war. I spoke to this very successful venture capitalist. I said, we're doing really well in the UK. He's a German guy. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, the UK's got more unicorns than France and Germany combined. And he looked at me and said, Sam, that's like a 100-meter race in a care home. That's like winning a 100-meter race in a care home. We're still very far behind. And we need to do a lot more. So capital is the first thing that we need to deploy. But across the scale, in the UK, one of the things we realize is our pension funds have very little exposure to these new technologies and supporting them. But a lot of US pension funds are. Canadian pension funds do well. So the pensioner from Ontario will probably do a lot better than the pensioner from Tooting in London because they have invested in these technologies. The other thing, to be fair to European founders, is there was a time when people used to think that European founders didn't have the same level of ambition that American founders do, and so they sell early so they can buy themselves a nice, villa on a ski resort. But that is not true. I think if you look at a lot of well-beaten companies from across Europe, whether it's your Skypes, your Spotifys, Tekever, your Helsings in the defense space, all European companies that became European founders that built global companies. And one of the things that we are beginning to see is that every time a company sells, for billions, all the key people around it make a lot of money, and they know how to build new companies. So the flywheel starts from there, and I think that is something else that we need. But you were very specific in your question, and now that I've left politics, I actually answer questions rather than say what my party wants me to say. And your question was about young people and the jobs they're going to be in. I think that is a real source of anxiety. It's a real source of anxiety because people are asking whether university actually is even worth it. As a former universities minister, I think it is worth it. I think people who use examples saying, well, 3 years out of university, someone was earning more than someone who went to university are using the wrong metric, because not only is university worth it in and of its own terms, universities are not there to just produce people for the labor market, but if you're going to be working into your 70s, you do need some grounding to be able to change jobs and move on as it is. But I think we need, and what I liked about what we're discussing earlier is, rather than everyone doing STEM, or everyone thinking if they don't do computer science, it's over, I think people realizing that actually their own developing unique skills is still going to be very important. And I would say the soft skills are probably going to be the hard skills in an AI world. The ability to empathize, the ability to interact and relate to other people, the ability, judgment, which is very hard to teach, insight. I think those sort of softer skills will be the harder skills, and maybe you don't learn all of those in the classroom necessarily, but you learn them from a lot of other activities that you do growing up. I think that is as important, unless you're going to be, the person building, Claude from scratch, in which case, good luck to you. I think you need all of these skills in order to succeed.
Thank you. So we need people to continue to be people and human, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Ricardo, in this context that was described by Sam, clearly you are a miracle. So tell us, how were you able to set up such an amazing company and such an amazing project in Europe? So tell us, what is the secret, if there is one, and how you can be an inspiration for future entrepreneurs in Europe, and how we can crack the code, basically.
Well, first of all, thank you. I never thought of it as a miracle, but it's a good starting point. Yeah. Just wanted to comment on a bunch of things that Sam mentioned. I agree with pretty much everything he said. Just a few colors and trying to answer or comment on your question, which is, I think first of all we speak about Europe. From our point of view, Europe doesn't exist as a whole. Right? We have to have an industrial, unfortunately, we have to have an industrial strategy that is by country, or at least by regions. Like, we cannot be in the defense world, and the security and defense world in general, security as well, and assume we're in Portugal or whatever country, and therefore we're Europeans and it's fine. Absolutely not. It doesn't work, because sovereignty plays a tremendous role. And I think this is, I think it largely, very, very largely contributes to the need for a stronger Europe. We have absolutely no chance of competing against the remaining blocs unless we really look at ourselves and we really have projects that bring European countries together. This is absolutely clear from an industrial point of view, from a defense capabilities point of view, security, etc. There's no way to solve this unless we are one, essentially. And so for us, I think this has been one of the major challenges. But actually, if you are able to create an organizational design, and I'm a software engineer, so I'm not qualified to speak about organizational design, but the fact is that we set out to build a company that could be almost like local everywhere. And actually, I think coming from Portugal is quite a big advantage. We are not. I don't think we would be able to almost be British in the UK. We have a lot of people doing some of the very critical sovereign projects. The same thing happening now in France, and it will happen in other countries. And I don't think we would be able to do that if we were French or British, or German, for that being. For a French, we would always be British. And for a French, we're actually Portuguese, which is, close to being French to some extent, and close to being British as well. So actually, I think that is one of the key advantages of being born in Portugal. But I think the key is for the sovereign issue, is you need to keep very strong values. The values need to be across the company, wherever it is. But then you need to be very flexible and adaptable, because you're not going to change the way things operate in France or in the UK or in Italy. It will be an Italian company, it will be a French company, it will be a UK company. So I think this is one thing that we Europeans get much better than the Americans. If you look at, and obviously have a lot of American friends running companies, and it's their way, right? They come in and like, this is our way of doing things because it works, and they're right, it works. Not necessarily in Europe. And I think that is a very big difficulty for us as a company, and for every other company. Like, how do you scale in Europe in a sovereignty-charged market? If you're in B2C, that's not really an issue, right? But if you are if the government is your customer, and particularly in this type of market, it's a huge barrier, and once you pass it, it's a huge defensive barrier. And that is the journey we're on right now. It's how do you build a pan-European company that across the company it's shared values, but then different. We don't have a single Portuguese or British person in our French company. Same in the UK, and we're more than 300 there. And this is, I think, a very strong proposition. Second point that I wanted to comment on, I'm trying not to extend too much, is the rate of change, even for, so Tekever has, compared to some of the large companies, we're very, very tiny. We're currently almost 1,500 people, of which probably almost like 1,000 are engineers, and of which more than 100 people just do AI, not software, just AI, data and AI. And even those, they get, one thing is being a specialist on some specific type of AI, and for us, AI today is LLMs, but there's a lot of other disciplines within AI. But one thing is being a specialist, another completely different thing is knowing how to apply it, even on your own work, on managing your team, on accomplishing your task in a better way. And I think the work, you need to be very humble, recognizing that we need to completely revise the way we do things. And I think this is inherently true within companies. I think it's true for ourselves as individuals. How can we leverage AI to live a better life, essentially? But in universities and in schools, it needs to be tremendously embraced. It doesn't mean that it's replacing the learnings you have in and outside of class. Absolutely not. It cannot, especially outside of class, I would say, but it cannot be ignored. And it pains me that we still have, and it's obvious because the change was, a couple of years, right? But in software engineering, computer science, AI, bachelor's, master's, etc., you still teach the same thing in the same way that you did 3 years ago. Are we sleeping? It's absolutely nonsensical, right? We need to start there. Not the fundamentals. The fundamentals need to be there, absolutely, right? Obviously. You need to being an engineer is not about, knowing how to code. It's about learning how to problem solve. That's it, right? That's it. Then the rest are disciplines. This is the base. And so I think that if I have a message there is, we need to look at our schools really, really quickly and sort ourselves out. At a global level, I think there's pockets of this in the world. I think in China you have amazing stuff happening. In the US, in some pockets as well. In Portugal, I think there's a couple of good examples. But in general, we're very far away, and we're like, no, this doesn't exist. We're going to ignore it, right? So I think that those are, I forgot what the question was, but I think those are the two things I wanted to comment on from what Sam said that I think is very important. I remember the question. I think how do you do it is basically you need to stay humble in learning. Look, I generally feel like the most incompetent person in the room, and I love it. And so you need to absolutely always bring great people in and essentially know how to play an orchestra and bring new players. Because when you're 25 years building a company, it's the soul of the company that you need to cherish, and the rest is completely different every day, hopefully every hour in the next years. And that's, I think, how you build a company for decades, not for selling quickly, which is not what we intend to do.
Thank you, Ricardo. Brian, I would like to, so we've discussed a lot the European perspective. We're in Europe, and we look at Europe from a broad and generous perspective. Give us the perspective from Asia. So again, this was discussed a little bit at lunchtime. There are countries that are much more enthusiastic about AI than it is here in Europe or in the US. So we want to hear from you, what is your experience from Hong Kong and China? And if you want to talk about the rest of Asia, feel free to do so. So bring us the Asian perspective, please.
Thank you very much. I had the privilege of heading to the Raisina Dialogue in March this year, held in New Delhi, and I paid a visit to a number of think tanks, the India Foundation, Asia Society, JNU, the brilliant JN University, in New Delhi, and a bastion of liberalism. And across many of my conversations with folks researching AI safety and ethics there, I asked them, what is India's AI strategy? And they have actually a designated sort of sovereign AI strategy that's been established. And by and large, the focus, they told me, was not so much on growth versus regulation, which is a dichotomy that we've seen interestingly crop up in our conversations today, but instead on applications. They want to know how AI could be applied and utilized, even when they have to draw upon foreign stacks, both American and also European stacks, not so much Chinese because of the relations between the Sino-Indian technological dynamics, but they're interested in applications. And when I speak with my friends in Kenya and Ethiopia working on AI, again, sovereignty is a nice word that they cite and they think about, but by and large what they're focusing upon is applications, how to derive small language models, enable them to basically assist, an average household, someone who's not necessarily exposed towards the English language, utilize small language models to translate from Swahili into English, as well as to reconnect with, of course, their own histories and cultural relics and fragments as well. The fact of the matter is that the world is very large, and for a vast majority of countries that cannot be at the frontier of technology, their focus is not absent, it's just that they're focusing on questions of applications and making the most use out of AI. That is a story concerning vast swathes of Central Asia, where I had the pleasure of speaking with Nazarbayev University's newly established computer and design school, the CDS dean. We had a call the other day. We were talking about how can we make AI embedded in the infrastructure, the civil service, the governance of Kazakhstan, which is a country with the 9th largest territory in the world, and also is the largest producer of uranium, and yet, frankly, I suspect most of us here wouldn't really think about Kazakhstan on your day-to-day business, so to speak, unless you, like me, you're a bit of a nerd and you like thinking about places beyond our peripheral vision. So that's the story concerning the complex and heterogeneity of Asia by and large. But I do want to spend a bit of time talking about China, because I am based there, but by and large, I don't see myself as representing it. Who am I to represent a country of 1.4 billion? And frankly speaking, if you'd asked the government there, I suspect many of the things I say would have probably rubbed them or the officials the wrong way. So I can't claim to represent the Chinese state, but at least what I can try and offer is an Asian perspective. And looking at China from Hong Kong, what I see is the 3 E's: education, ecosystem, and finally, of course, energy. Starting first with education, China produces 3.3 million STEM graduates a year. India, approximately 3 or 2.8. America, 850,000 up to 900,000. These are all incredible numbers, but the ratios, they are telling, right? You can say, well, there are worse universities in China, even though actually Zhejiang University, by a Dutch university ranking, has overtaken most universities in the US, barring possibly MIT, to be one of the most patent-producing universities in the world, if not at least in the top 3, right? And that's to say the Chinese invest a lot into STEM education, bringing up engineers, bringing up folks who understand mathematics and engage in basic research. And that is why over the past 2 decades, many of these universities in China have come leaps and bounds and contribute towards the sort of environmental perks and strengths and wherewithal that Ricardo was talking about just then. But education alone is insufficient, because if you have an ossified state and capture by political forces, then you're not going to get real progress, right? And that is where the second E comes in, ecosystem. When we look at actual innovation, the iterative cycles or the speed of innovation in China is quite staggering. Yes, the Chinese state provides overhead, subsidies, all these concessions, industrial policy, and that's often highlighted as the be-all and end-all to the Chinese story. But I don't think so. As someone who believes firmly in capitalism and the power of the markets, the beauty of the Chinese system lies in the fact that there are markets. Sure, they're interfered with. Sure, they're regulated. Sure, there's a visible hand. But if you asked, what's top of mind of the BYD or the Xiaopeng or the Geely or hundreds or thousands of these automakers that you've never heard of, because chances are I've not heard of them either, at the top of the mind of the CEOs is we need to win the race against all the other thousands of Chinese companies. And that means not just gaming the system of subsidies and industrial policies, but also delivering cheaper, better, faster goods with reduced cost inefficiencies to declutter and to streamline. And this is a natural implication of the base, a very large base of extremely entrepreneurial people who want to survive both with or without state support. And that's also where the ingenuity of the Chinese experience comes in, as opposed to seeing everything through lenses of government provision. That's only one half the equation. It's not a be-all and end-all. And finally, very quickly on energy, 1/3 of China's energy now is produced through renewable sources. Yes, it is still a very, very significant, consumer of coal. And let's face it, non-renewable consumption remains an integral part of China's energy equation, which is why the Strait of Hormuz crisis is so concerning for them, right? And yet, at the same time, energy is not just about generation, it's also about the infrastructure. And what I will say here is that the energy grid of the Chinese is amongst the most sophisticated and complete in the world right now when it comes to infrastructural density and also intactness. Only South Korea outranks and outstrips China when it comes to maturity and sophistication of the energy grid. And you need energy for AI, for it's not just about the chips or indeed the models, it's actually about, at the end of the day, the energy. Hence why there's talk of using 3 Mile Island and all these private energy data center build out, which is not just about the centers, but also the energy suppliers, as well as the cooling mechanisms and facilities that we hear now in the US, in Europe, in Southeast Asia, and beyond. So these 3 E's encapsulate the way I think China looks at AI, but of course, it's still on a learning curve, and there's a lot that China could learn from our friends in the Silicon Valley, in the US, as well as, of course, our friends here in Brussels or in Europe by and large. Mistral in France, of course, being one case in point of a champion that I think we really can get behind. And of course, Ricardo's company, Tekever, is another that we certainly should keep an eye out for as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. I want to now have a question for all 3 of you, and in a way, I'm taking advantage of my position. I come from the university world, and I am challenged very often about how AI is going to change us. So, I have 3 worldwide experts, so why not use that power to ask you that question? And I want to challenge you even more. So I want to ask you, how do you see the future of education and the creation of knowledge in this era of AI and technology? And to make it really, to make it personal, what advice will you give your children? Should they go to university or not? I have 3, and I'm happy to share with you if they are going to university or not. But it's a really important question, and we have colleagues here, and I guess a lot of people have children or grandchildren, and we want to know what sort of advice we can give them. So who wants to start? Who is brave enough for the... Sam, do you want to go first?
I'll try.
It's by this order, right?
Yes, okay. So my children are 10 and 12, so they've got a long way to go before university. I think, firstly, on the education point, everything Ricardo said about how we teach in schools has got to change. But what's interesting is education has been resistant to technology for a very long time. Every technological wave goes through some kind of what is called the S-curve of adoption, and somehow it never really works in education. And I say this being on the board of an education technology company in the US. But AI is one that really is going to change education because the students are using it first. Right? They're using it for their homework. They're using it for their essays. They're using it for their PhDs. The cost of knowledge is just plummeting. And even my son, you ask him something, he asked me a question, and I'm in an hour, and by the time I've figured out what I want to say, he's just typed on Copilot and said, I don't need your help, I've got the answer. So because of that, I think the schools are going to have to respond to the fact that actually it's the students who are mastering this technology and the school has to do something about it. I think the way you do examinations will change. There will probably be more of an oral component in examinations rather than all being written exams because it's easy to produce the work. So can you test whether they really understand it? I came across a school where what they do is they get the essay written by AI, and then the homework is for the children to critique the AI, to try and figure out where the AI has gone wrong. And there is still developing your critical faculties, not just how quickly can you produce 1,500 words. So I think we're going to see a lot of creativity within the education system in terms of how to respond to this, right through to how people are assessed and examined and graded. And I think it's also going to be the case even at the PhD level. I came across a startup in Silicon Valley where they're trying to deal with the fact that there is just so much knowledge being generated. And currently, if it's a knowledge generated from a large language model, that can't count towards your PhD. And these guys are like, well, why can't it? We'll develop an application that will be able to sift through all that synthetic knowledge and tell you what is really genuine and add into the composite of human knowledge. So education is going to be transformed. But I think that in terms of what I would be advising my children to do is I would say that in life there is always doing what you are best at and doing it very well is a good place to start, rather than trying to game it. Everybody's doing, if you're brilliant at languages, then master languages, and then apply it in an AI context. I've been following Duolingo for quite a long time, and you've got a computer scientist who was from Colombia, and he said he really liked languages, and because he was from outside the States, he recognized that he came from a country where if you didn't learn how to speak language, your economic opportunities were very limited. So he decides to set up a language app, and he goes around to all the venture capital firms, and eventually someone gives them $3 million, and later on he asks the guy, why did you invest in us? And the guy said, I didn't think you were going to get anywhere, but I thought you were really hardworking, so we might as well take a punt on you, right? And now that company's worth 20 billion. Now, if you wanted to be an entrepreneur and you said, where should I start? Nobody will say to you, the big winner in future is going to be a language app. So I think that is why focusing on where you have edge is more important than, is AI, should I do this or should I not do that? And the other thing is I really resist it when people say, everybody should go and be a plumber now in the UK, right? Or an electrician, because those are jobs that AI can't really touch. But that's because we haven't had physical AI yet, and we were involved with Amy Labs, a company founded by Jan LeCun, a Frenchman who was chief AI scientist at Meta, another European. And his AI lab is about physical AI that can understand and process the physical world, rather than the large language models we have here. And if he is successful, that is what is going to power industrial automation. So good luck to you being a plumber to avoid AI, right? Before you're aware that the robots are going to be doing that too. So and it seems very sort of nebulous to say focus on where you have edge, but as I have grown up and coming close to 50, I was born in the UK, I grew up in Ghana, and as a son of immigrants, you had to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. And when my mother heard I was going to do philosophy at Oxford, she had her head in her hands, because she thought, all the time and effort they are putting into my education, I was going to be, why don't I go and do law and become a lawyer, because that's a status job to do. And I think that sort of trying to sort of second guess and think, if I do this, will lead to, of course you've got to have a plan, but none of us have a crystal ball. But I think in life, doing something where you have genuine edge, it's very hard to beat.
Thank you. Yeah, Brian?
Well, Sam and I did the same degree at Oxford, actually. But my advice is just very simple. Ask better questions. That's it.
So go to university or don't go to university?
Well, I think they should say, let's ask a better question.
That's
okay.
Right. By the way, I think on the university point, there is a real point around there aren't enough good alternatives to university that are well-funded. And when you don't have good alternatives to university that are well-funded, we do have people defaulting to university when actually their skills will be better employed. And I think the Swiss do it really well in having two systems that are both selective. And if you want to be a chef, you could go and you can become a Michelin star chef. If you want to be an engineer, you could go and become an engineer. But in many countries, you have one system that is dominant over the other, and that is not helpful.
Ricardo.
Well, so difficult to add. I do have 5 kids, so some experience there. Some of them passed the university period. But look, I think that we are going to watch a profound transformation of the educational system. There's no way around it, period, right? It's a matter of when and how, not so much if. And that needs to happen. We need to, and it's not about automating or like keeping the same model, the same processes, the same evaluation processes, etc., and just making them resistant against it. That's completely wrong. It's completely backwards. It's basically how do you rethink the system to hack it because now you have AI. I think that's essentially it. Kids learn a lot if you give them guidance and freedom, right? You go, you figure it out. The figuring out part is what university is about. The guided figuring it out. Let's embrace it, right? So absolutely we need to rethink educational systems at all ages assuming that you have this extremely powerful capability, right? Like you've done with other technologies in the past. Probably this is one of the most impactful ones for education ever. I'm not qualified to speak about this, but it does seem like that. With regard to advice to kids, look, I think going to university is way more than classes. I can't tell them this, but none of them is here, but I skipped, like, I don't know, 60 or 70% of the classes. And I was doing more interesting stuff, doing work and projects and, dating. And, obviously, that's the experience. And if you don't go through that, you're missing out. You're missing out on a period where actually you're pretty safe. You can experiment with stuff. We created so many projects. Some of them could have been companies. Some of them were just stupid ideas. But we had the freedom to do stupid ideas. And that's a very important period in life. In school, you have to be there. In high school, right? You have to be there. In university, you don't have to be there. You're there because you want to be there, right? You're already over 18 and all that stuff. And you have a tremendous time to be creative, experiment, fail, be embarrassed because you failed. And I think that is probably even more important than the stuff you learn in class, because honestly, I learn way more from books and internet, beginning of the internet kind of, but than from teachers with PowerPoints, right? Probably any one of us, if we are honest about it. And so what we remember is the great human professor and that connection with that professor. That's not about content.
Yeah, of course.
Right? So
I think that's a great way to end. That, all in all, what matters is the right questions, and that it's good to go to university if you don't go to classes. Thank you.
Bravo.
Merci. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.